We did learn hours ago that China's president will visit Russia next week from Monday through Wednesday to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Dr. Robert A. Sanders is a distinguished lecturer of national security at the University of New Haven and joins us live to talk more about all of this. Thank you so much for being here.
Glad to be with you, Josh.
So first off, your thoughts upon learning that we are going to see China's president visit Russia's president. We know neither of them are in the best of terms with the U.S. right now.
Well, China needs a little buddy, and Russia needs a big friend, because Russia is increasingly isolated in the world over its unprecedented and unlawful invasion of Ukraine. And China, after fighting unsuccessfully COVID for all of these years, it now has some economic pressures and some domestic issues of their own that they have to deal with. So for them to partner up, if we think back to the Cold War, when the communist entities were linked at a much closer and much tighter basis, they're trying to reconstruct that if they can.
So do you think the U.S. is going to be watching this very closely? Do you think it could have any sort of impact on relations with China and Russia, or is this essentially just a possible meeting between the two?
No, we're going to watch this very closely. As you heard last week, the National Security Advisor and the U.S. Secretary of National Security Advisor, the U.S. Secretary of State, made very clear to China that if China gives lethal equipment to Russia in the fight against Ukraine, that would be a very serious line-crossing event that the United States and the Western world would take very, very negatively. I'm very, very sure that one of the things that Putin's going to ask for in this conversation is lethal equipment. He can't sustain this fight without outside support. He doesn't have the munitions factories to build what he needs. That's why he had to turn to Iran to get drones. And if he could turn to China to get other pieces of equipment, that would help his fight immensely.
We know, of course, that Poland and Slovakia have now said that they are going to provide those fighter jets over to Ukraine. Do you think this meeting has anything to do with that?
It's a backdrop. I think the meeting was going to happen before that. It was a time where Putin needs to reach out. He needs a big friend. And China, Xi in particular, looks at Putin as an understudy, a lesser than, but also of like mind in terms of the West is an adversary and a peer competitor. And the closer they are linked together, they believe that it's going to be more possible for them to move forward. For Russia in particular to win the fight in Ukraine, and for Xi to assert the dominance that he wants to assert in the Pacific and the Eastern Hemisphere.
When you hear about a meeting between China's president and Russia's president, people start to, say in the U.S., whoa, what is going on here? Is this any reason for concern for people in the U.S.?
No more than any meeting between other heads of states and other nations in this sense. Nations talk to each other. They need to, in order to have continuing agreements and interactions across all kinds of different areas. We call it the dime fill, diplomacy, information, military, economic, financial, intelligence, and law or law enforcement. That's how nations interact. That's how nations support their national security programs. In order to do that, you have to talk to those who are your friends and those who are your adversaries, so you know which way to go and how to plan. Every year, the United States puts out a national security strategy. That national security strategy tells us how we're going to manage our national security, and it's built around that dime fill. Who are our friends in that dime fill process, and who are our adversaries?
So what questions do you think you still have at this point? We just found out about this meeting earlier on this morning. Is there anything specifically that you hope that we find out in the coming days, or that you want to know about this visit?
Well, I hope our intelligence agencies are able to determine what help has been given already, and if that is going to change, help from China to Russia, and if that's going to change, and if it's going to change, how, and what are our possible counteractions to interdict that help if that help is lethal. We have sanction actions that are generally under Article 41 of the UN Charter, and we have sanction action under Article 42 of the UN Charter, but the 42 is more of a militaristic response. 41 is all of those things that I said in the dime fill that add up to sanctions and stopping an individual country from being able to do certain things in certain places. We're going to look at all of that. We're going to decide which one of those avenues is best for us after we get the information. So the big thing we want to do in this meeting is determine as much as possible what agreements they come to and where they still have problems with each other, because the problems we can exploit and agreements we need to defeat.
Do you see a future, a near future, I should say, where President Biden actually sits down with the presidents of China or Russia?
I would see him sitting down with China before Russia. If you've seen the news today, Vladimir Putin was just indicted by the International Criminal Court. He was indicted along with one of his underlings for stealing children from Ukraine and taking them to Russia, where Russia has a dwindling population. And at the beginning of the war, you heard lots of cities in Ukraine that had been taken over by Russians, where the Russians were moving the Ukrainians into Russia. They were taking the children, particularly the orphan children, and giving them to Russians, giving them new names, giving them Russian passports, sending them to Russian school, teaching them to speak in Russian dialects, making essentially a state-authorized kidnapping scenario. The ICC has recognized that, and they've charged Putin and his underling, who is running the program, with crimes, international crimes against humanity. So I don't think the president meeting face-to-face with Putin is something that's going to happen anytime soon. Xi, on the other hand, I think he will meet with Xi. Xi's the lead in this aspect, and what we want to do is continue to convince Xi that while he wants to support Russia, it's a bad bet.
All right. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us here. Is there anything else that you want to add before I let you go?
I want to add something about the domestic policy right now. We have a couple of people in the United States, particularly two people running for the Republican nomination, or one's announced, one's not announced, who have both said that we don't have an interest in the war in Ukraine. And I dispute that. We have an interest in keeping the the Western world and the values and principles of the Western world safe. We have an interest in telling nations around the world that you don't have the authority to unilaterally change someone else's borders by force. That's a message not just to Russia, but that's also a message to China about Taiwan. So if a politician is telling its constituents or other folks that our war in Ukraine is someplace we should not be, I dispute that, and I think they're wrong.
All right. Thank you again, Dr. Sanders. We appreciate the feedback there. A lot of great information and a lot left to figure out here.
You're welcome.
And I do want to get to more on what Dr. Sanders was talking about, this breaking news that we are following, as the International Criminal Court has said that it has issued an arrest warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin for war crimes because of his alleged involvement in abductions of children from Ukraine. The court did say in a statement moments ago that Putin is, quote, allegedly responsible for the war crime of unlawful deportation of population, children, and that of unlawful transfer of population, also children, from occupied areas of Ukraine to the Russian Federation. It also issued a warrant Friday for the arrest of the Commissioner for Children's Rights in the office of the President of the Russian Federation on similar allegations. A possible trial of any Russians at the ICC does remain a long way off, as Moscow does recognize the court's jurisdiction and does not extradite its nationals. Ukraine also is not a member of the court, but it has granted the ICC jurisdiction over its territory. An ICC prosecutor has visited 4 times since opening an investigation 1 year ago. The ICC said that its pretrial chamber found that there were, quote, reasonable grounds to believe that each suspect bears responsibility for the war crime of unlawful deportation of population and that of unlawful transfer of population from occupied areas of Ukraine to the Russian Federation in prejudice of Ukrainian children. The court statement said that, quote, there are reasonable grounds to believe that Mr. Putin bears individual criminal responsibility for the child abductions for having committed the acts directly, jointly with others, and or through others, and for his failure to exercise control properly over civilian and military subordinates who committed the acts. On Thursday, a UN-backed inquiry cited Russian attacks against civilians in Ukraine, including systematic torture and killing in occupied regions, among potential issues that amount to war crimes and possibly crimes against humanity. So again, the International Criminal Court saying that it has issued an arrest warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin for war crimes because of that alleged involvement in the abduction of children from Ukraine. That is breaking at this hour, and we will bring you more information as we do get it.